The question is that this motion be agreed to. Amendment, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I rise to move what the Noble Lord the Minister has I've correctly identified as a fatal motion, that the House do not approve this statutory instrument, this order, on two primary grounds: the lack of the democratic oversight and the concerns of the medical profession. Before I begin, I want to make it clear that I'm not opposed to the existence of physician associates or assistants or their anaesthetist colleagues, not opposed to their regulation. Indeed, I'm keen to see them regulated. And I respect the efforts of current and future PAs and AAs who complete their studies and have the student debt to prove it. Now, I also want to be clear that unless I get an indication from the House that it wishes me to do so, it's not my intention to put this motion to the vote. My intention in tabling it was to ensure that the many hundreds of voices of concern who have reached me personally, and the more than 21,000 doctors and patients who wrote to their MPs opposing this order, are heard, and that the government considers, seriously I hope, considers whether it should go forward to regulate PAs and AAs in this matter with this order. Now, I want to address the second part of my fatal motion first, about the views of doctors and patients. Sir Robert Peel invented the concept of policing by consent. I want to adapt that for these circumstances by saying that we must have regulation by consent. I'm sure all noble lords engaged tonight are aware that the British Medical Association, the Doctors Association UK, and the Every Doctor Group are opposed to this statutory instruments, for reasons on which I'm sure we're going to hear much more from the noble ladies Finlay and Britton with their regret motions. One of the concerns, very serious concerns, is about clarity for patients and the confusion introduced by the title associate. And on that, I just want to go to one report from the BBC, an interview with Marion Chesterton, the mother of Emily, who tragically died after being seen twice by a PA and misdiagnosed. Marion said that her daughter didn't know she hadn't seen a doctor. And Marion added, and I think this really is something people should focus on, I'm quoting Marion, "Physician associate sounds grander than a GP." I want to pick up a point made by the Noble Lord the Minister about PAs and AAs having been round for 20 years, a very often cited statistic. Well, if we look back to 2014 and 2015, there were fewer than 50 PA and AA graduates. There was literally handfuls in the system. It's only when you get to 2018 that you start to see the figures leaping up to 400 graduates, and the government's aim is to head towards the figures that the Noble Lord the Minister cited. So we may not have seen much confusion, but there was very few people to be confused about within the system. This is a situation that's arising now, and that I would say really demands a reconsideration. However, I am largely going to leave the arguments about title and the question of the General Medical Council as regulator to the regret motions, because what I really want to focus on is the word consent and the concerns of doctors and patients in the context of the state of our medical system. We debate as junior doctors are in the middle of their 10th strike action. We debate as 1 in 7 British trained doctors is working overseas. We debate after a BMA poll found last year that around 40% of junior doctors plan to leave the NHS as soon as they can find another job. We need to make changes to the system. That's something on which the Noble Lord and I think pretty well everyone, are agreed. But I would assert that we can only make changes to the system with the consent of all those involved. There's a moral argument for that, but there's also a very powerful practical argument. The government needs to work cooperatively, sensitively, to listen to our medical professionals rather than ride roughshod over their serious concerns, concerns that are shared by many patients, concerns that have filled my social media feed in recent days. Now, the first part of my motion is about democracy. The order got virtually no scrutiny or consideration in the other place. We, of course, have no opportunity to amend it, to tackle the issues the noble ladies focus on in their regret motions, only the extraordinarily rarely used option of rejecting it. Now, I've not got any indication from the Labor Party that they would support that, and I'm assuming that their silence on the order paper means that they support the government's path. But I would ask the Labor front bench to consider whether we really do not have to take this back to the drawing board. It's a question I would like to put to them very directly. Now, the Labour Lord the Minister raised the report of our hard-working and, I fear, underappreciated Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee, which makes it very clear that this is not just about PAs and AAs. This is meant to be the model for broad and widespread changes of medical regulation in the future. Now, the Secondary Legislation Committee's report says that this is the first use of powers inserted into the Parent Act by the Health and Care Act 2021, giving the direct power to GMC to make and amend standards and procedures for these associates, in their bolding, removing the process from parliamentary oversight. Now, I think it's interesting that the committee says that the explanatory memorandum should have been more explicit on this point and on what safeguards remain. Now, in testimony under questioning from Your Lordship's House Committee, the Department confirmed that changes in the registration processes, etc., will no longer be laid before Parliament in any form. They will just be posted to the GMC's website. But, the Department added, members of either house can respond to consultations if they wish. I'm glad about that. Now, this was really not being made clear through the process, as the committee highlights. And I think it is worth focusing on the fact that had it not been for the noble ladies in my motions, we would not even be doing this in the main chamber. We would be in the secondary chamber, getting, as we all well know, very little attention at all. Now, I particularly want to highlight, in case noble lords did not receive it, the briefing we received from the Professional Standards Authority, which has responsibility for overseeing the GMC's activities, which said in what I think you would describe in bureaucratic terms as a carefully worded briefing, and I quote, "We need to keep under review, as the reforms are rolled out, the accountability framework proposed, to balance the increased autonomy for regulators with greater oversight." Finally, there's a final point I wish to make, which is to address the fear, the concerns of many patient groups and communities, which the noble lord alluded to, that their communities, their families, will lose ready, or perhaps any, access to doctors and be relegated to a second tier of NHS services, with PAs with 2 years of medical training versus GPs with 10. Now, the noble Lord, Lord Markham, in the letter following up the very useful briefing he arranged last week, and thank you very much for that and for the letter, makes reference, as he did in his speech, to the government's aim of doubling the number of medical places in England to 15,000 by 2031-2. Now, the noble lord gave, I believe, the same figures as were reported in the Observer on Sunday, which was the result of a leaked letter from the Health Minister and the Minister for Skills, Apprenticeships and Higher Education to the independent regulator of the Office for Students. Now, that has been interpreted, the figures in that letter have been interpreted as a significant backpedalling on the government's final aim and total. So I would really ask the noble Lord the Minister to comment if he remains confident, can guarantee the House that we are actually on target to achieve that final figure, given that we don't seem to be taking very strong steps in that direction. Now, the way that letter leaked, the way those figures came out, can only amplify the fears of many communities that those who can pay can go private, as increasing numbers of Britons feel they are forced to do, and patients at the centre of well-serviced areas where doctors can supplement their NHS pay with private work will keep access to a service like that now available, while other areas, the kind of areas that are often talked about as in need of levelling up will get a second-class service. Now, we have seen, I think we have to think about the context of this, our NHS battered by privatisation, with nearly 10% of services now provided by for-profit providers, more than half of under-18 inpatient psychiatric services. We've seen the disaster of PFI schemes, now set to cost £80 billion for the original £13 billion investment, the equivalent of £1,200 for everyone in the UK. We've seen this jewel in the British Crown worn away by austerity, a decade in which investment in infrastructure and new technology collapsed, and the pay in particular of junior doctors and midwives plummeted in real terms. Please let us not deliver another blow. Please withdraw this order, either tonight or afterwards. Take the path of consensus. Take the path of democratic oversight. Bring this forward as legislation that can be debated, amended, properly scrutinised. Please listen to the fear of communities. I ask particularly everyone in this debate, but particularly the Labor frontbench, to consider that approach and the wisdom of that approach. I beg to move.
The original question was that the motion be agreed to.